Morning, everyone. Myself, Dr. Smriti, Senior Resident in the Department of Ophthalmology, SLIMS, going to present a lecture on uvea, its anatomy, physiology, and its clinical correlations. Now, this is the second part of this topic. In the previous part, we have studied about the basic introduction to uvea and the detailed anatomy, physiology, and applied aspect of iris. Today, we are going to study about the ciliary body and the choroid. A ciliary body, it is the forward continuation of the choroid at ora serrata. In the cut section, it looks like it is triangular in shape. This is the ciliary body. It is a triangular structure can be seen in the cut section. Now the anterior side of this triangle, that is A, it is a part of anterior chamber angle. And in the middle of this anterior side, the iris is attached. This is the root of the iris attached to the anterior surface of the ciliary body. Now the outer side of the triangle, it lies against the sclera with a suprachoroidal space in between. And the inner side of the triangle, it is divided into two parts, the pars plana and the pars plicata. So ciliary body is a triangular shaped structure in a cut section which has three sides, the anterior side, the outer side, and the inner side. The inner side was divided into pars plicata and pars plana. The pars plicata, it is the anterior vascular part which is about 2 to 2.5 mm long, and it contains the ciliary muscles. It contains ciliary muscle and has finger-like projections. Now the pars plana, it is a 4 millimeter long structure. This is a posterior avascular flatter part, which is 5 millimeter wide temporally and 3 millimeter wide nasally. This is the flattered area, pars plana. The avascular pars plana is located 3 to 4 millimeter from the corneal limbus, which is the safest approach for posterior surgeries to get the entry into the vitreous chamber. Now the functions of the ciliary body are aqueous humor production, lens accommodation, and facilitating the aqueous drainage. Now the ciliary processes, these are 70 to 80 finger-like projections with vascular core radiating from pars plicata. These are the finger-like projections radiating from pars plicata. They occupy the peripheral part of the posterior chamber, and each process is about 2 millimeter long and 0.5 millimeter in diameter. And these are the site of aqueous production. The ciliary processes increases the surface area for the secretion. The ultrastructure of ciliary process, it consists of the network of capillaries, the stroma of the ciliary process, and two layers of epithelium. Now see in this structure, outer side there are two layers of epithelium, the cuboidal epithelium and the inner epithelium, then the stroma in which the network of capillaries are present. Here. The grooves in between, they serve as the attachments for the lens zonules. These are the grooves. They're So the suspensories or news, they get attachment at the grooves. The lens or news are the suspensory ligament of the lens produced by ciliary epithelium. They provide stability to the lens and helps in accommodation. Now the network of capillaries, it occupies the center of each process. Each capillary consists of very thin endothelium with fenestration. They are lined by a basement membrane, and mural cells or pericytes are present within the basement membrane. The stroma of the ciliary processes are very thin and separates the capillary network from epithelium layers. It consists of ground substance made of mucopolysaccharides, proteins, and solute of plasma. Now, there are few collagen connective tissue fibers and wandering macrophages. They are also present in the stroma. Now, the epithelium, which is two-layered, the outer pigmented epithelium and inner non-pigmented epithelium. Their apical surfaces are in opposition to each other. The outer pigmented epithelium, they contains numerous melanin granules. And the inner non-pigmented, they contain the mitochondria, zonula occludens, and lateral and surface interdigitations, and tight junction between the cells of this layer form the blood aqueous layer. And this is the gap junctions that we see in between the cells. This is the basement membrane. These are the non-pigmented cell. This is a pigmented cell containing melanin pigment granules. And there are gap junctions, interdigitations in between the tight junctions. And because of this, this is called the blood aqueous barrier. And then again, there is basement membrane, ciliary stroma, and the capillaries. So the blood from capillaries, they do not cross these gap junctions, and aqueous is a clear fluid. Now the microscopic structure from within inwards consists of 5 layers: the supraciliary lamina, the stroma of the ciliary body, layer of pigmented epithelium, layer of non-pigmented epithelium, and internal limiting membrane. Now the supraciliary lamina, it is the outermost condensed part of the stroma. It consists of pigmented collagen fibers, continuation of suprachoroidal lamina. Anteriorly, it continues with anterior limiting membrane of iris. The stroma of the ciliary body consists of collagenous connective tissue and fibroblasts. And there are ciliary muscles, blood vessels and nerves, pigmentary cells, and other cells that are embedded in the stroma of the ciliary body. Now the ciliary muscles, they are non-striated muscle which occupies most of the outer part of ciliary body. And there are 3 main groups: the longitudinal and meridional fibers, the oblique or radial fibers, and the circular fibers. These are the longitudinal or meridional fibers. They are the most external and closest to the sclera, and they pass posteriorly into the stroma of the ciliary body. The oblique or radial fibers, they radiate out from the scleral spur. The circular fiber, they occupy the anterior and inner portion of the ciliary body, which is nearest to the lens, and they run parallel to the limbus, which directly acting as a sphincter. Anywhere in the body, the circular muscles, they act as a sphincter only. The main action of all the parts of ciliary muscle is to slacken the suspensory ligaments of the lens and thus helps in accommodation. The longitudinal muscle fibers, they form a tendinous attachment to the scleral spur, and their contraction, it increases the aqueous flow by opening up the spaces of trabecular meshwork. These longitudinal fibers, they are attached with the scleral spur, And the openings, the collapsible openings of the trabecular meshwork, when these fiber contracts, they pull the openings open, and the drainage of the aqueous humor, it increases. The contraction of the ciliary muscle, especially the longitudinal and circular fibers, they pulls the ciliary body forward in accommodation. So we have read that the function of ciliary body was in lens accommodation and aqueous humor drainage. So here it is, due to the longitudinal and the circular fiber, they pull the ciliary body forward in accommodation. See, this is the circular fiber. These are the meridional or radial fibers. These zonules are tensed now. Lens is flattened. Now these fibers are relaxed. The zonules are tensed and lens is at least convex and flattened. This is for the distant vision. And when these fibers they contract, when these fibers contract, the fibers they get relaxed. And the lens is bulging and becomes most convex for near vision. Now vascular stroma, it contains major arterial circle just in front of the circular fibers. This is the major arterial circle. The circle is formed by the anastomosis between the long posterior ciliary artery, this is the long posterior ciliary artery here, and anterior ciliary artery, this is the anterior ciliary artery, and branches, and it sends branches to iris and ciliary body. Now the third layer, the layer of pigmented epithelium, it is the forward continuation of retinal pigmentary epithelium. Anteriorly, it is continuous with the anterior epithelium of the iris. The layer of non-pigmented epithelium, it consists mainly of low columnar or cuboidal cells. And it is a forward continuation of sensory retina, which stops at ora serrata. It continues anteriorly with posterior pigmented epithelium of the iris. Now the internal limiting membrane, it lines the non-pigmented epithelium, and it is a forward continuation of internal limiting membrane of the retina. Now the nerve supply of ciliary body, it is sensory nervous supply and autonomic nervous supply. The sensory nerves, the sensory fibers run from the nasociliary branch of ophthalmic division of trigeminal nerve as a long ciliary nerve, and these fibers they enter the ciliary body and terminate in the iris and cornea and ciliary muscle. Now, the parasympathetic nervous supply derives from the Edinger-Westphal nucleus via oculomotor nerve. It goes to the accessory ganglion, and then via short ciliary nerve, it goes to the ciliary muscle, supplies the ciliary muscle. This is the oculomotor nerve we are seeing, and along the inferior division, it goes to the accessory ganglion. Then via short ciliary nerves, they are supplied to the ciliary muscles. Now the choroid. The choroid is a posterior portion of the middle vascular coat, which is extremely vascular and extends from optic disc to the ora serrata. The inner surface is smooth, brown, and lies in contact with RPE, retinal pigmentary epithelium, and the outer surface is rough and attached to sclera. Posteriorly, it is 0.2 millimeter thick. Anteriorly, it is 0.1 millimeter thick. It is firmly attached to the margin of the optic disc and loosely at points where the vessels and nerves enter. The attachment to the sclera is the strongest one. Now, the functions of the choroid, the main function is the nourishment of the adjacent retina because it is highly vascular core. And the other function is that it blocks the light entering through the sclera and retain the light enters through the pupil. It also absorbs the reflected light in the eyeball. Now, the microscopic structures of choroid from within the inwards consist of 4 layers: the suprachoroidal lamina, lamina fuchsia, suprachoroidal lamina, the stroma of the choroid, the choriocapillaries, and the Brooks membrane. This blue line is the Brooks membrane. Then this is the layer of choriocapillaries, small fenestrated capillaries. This is the layer of stroma of the choroid containing the small and large vessels, and the outermost layer was suprachoroidal lamina. Suprachoroidal lamina is thin membrane, just 10 to 34 microns, made of condensed collagen fibers, melanocytes, and fibroblasts. It continues anteriorly with supraciliary lamina. The space between this membrane and the sclera is called suprachoroidal space, which contains long and short posterior ciliary nerves and arteries. The stroma of the choroid, it contains the vessels, nerves, and cells and connective tissue. And the cells, they include melanocytes, fibroblasts, mast cells, plasma cells, but the main bulk is formed by the vessels, which are arranged in 2 layers. The outer layer of the larger vessels, which is called as Haller's layer, and the inner layer of medium vessels, which is called Sattler's layer. So this is the layer, outer layer, the larger size vessels. They are called Haller layer. The medium-sized blood vessel, they are called Sattler's layer. And this is the choriocapillaries. The choriocapillaries, they are consist of a rich bed of wide bore fenestrated capillaries, which are 18 to 50 microns in diameter. And it receives most of its blood from medium and large blood vessels of the stroma. It nourishes the retinal pigmentary epithelium and outer layers of the sensory retina, and the density is greatest at macula. Choriocapillaries, they are divided into non-overlapping lobules or hexagonal patches. Now the Brooks membrane, which is also called lamina vitri, it is the innermost layer of the choroid. It extends from the optic nerve head to the ora serrata, and it is a thin diffractile connective tissue membrane between the choriocapillaries and the retinal pigmentary epithelium. It prevents choroid vessels from penetrating the retina, but allows the nutrients and proteins to reach the retina. The constituent elements of both the retina and choroid are present in this membrane. Microscopically, it is composed of basement membrane of RPE, inner collagenous layer, elastic tissue layer, outer collagenous layer, and basement membrane of choriocapillaries. So this is the microscopic structure of Brooks membrane. This is the basement membrane of retinal pigmentary epithelial cells. This is the inner collagenous zone. This is the outer collagenous zone. And in between there is elastic layer. And the last layer is the basement membrane of the choriocapillaries. The clinical significance of this Brooks membrane or choroid is that choroidal ischemia often occurs as a pale hexagonal patches, which is in mosaic pattern. And in choroid, the vessels, the capillaries, they are divided or are arranged in overlapping lobules or hexagonal patches. During choroidal phase of fluorescein angiography, these lobules, they fill independently from one another, giving a transiently patched or blotched appearance. By analyzing this, we can say that this is a case of choroidal ischemia. These are the fundus picture of right eye. These are showing the mosaic pattern or hexagonal patches of choroidal ischemia. And the other thing is that Brooks membrane, it becomes thickened with increasing age, and it produces hyaline excrescences, which are known as drusins. And drusins are the visible deposits between the retinal pigmentary epithelial basement membrane and inner layer of collagenous layer of Brooks membrane. Here we can see these are the yellow deposits within the Brooks membrane, which are called drugens. Now the blood supply of the uveal tract. The choroidal circulation accounts for 85% of blood circulating through the eye. The choroid receives artery from the branches of the ophthalmic artery, and it has two arterial systems, the anterior arterial system and the posterior arterial system. The uveal tract is supplied by three sets of arteries: the anterior ciliary arteries, the short posterior ciliary, and the long posterior ciliary arteries. Now, the short posterior ciliary arteries, they arise as two trunks from the ophthalmic arteries, and each trunk divided to 10 to 20 branches. They pierce the sclera around the optic nerve and supply the choroid in segmental manner. The long posterior ciliary artery, they arise as nasal and temporal branch from ophthalmic artery. They pierce the sclera obliquely on medial and lateral side of the optic nerve. They run forward in suprachoroidal space to reach the ciliary muscles without giving any branch, and anastomose with each other with the anterior ciliary arteries to form the major arterial circles within the stroma of the ciliary body. And they give branches which supply the ciliary body. The anterior ciliary arteries, they are derived from the muscular branches of the ophthalmic artery. They are 7 in number, 2 in each from the arteries of superior rectus, inferior rectus, medial rectus, and 1 from the lateral rectus. All the recti of the eye, they have 2 muscular branches of blood supply, 2 branches, except the lateral rectus, which has only 1. So in total, we have 7 muscular branches. They pass anteriorly in the episclera and give branches to sclera, limbus, and conjunctiva, and ultimately pierce the sclera near the limbus to enter the ciliary muscles. They anastomose with 2 long posterior arteries to form the major arterial circle, as we have seen previously, and several branches arise from the major arterial circles and supply the ciliary process. There is 1 branch for each process. Many branches from major arterial circle, they run radially through iris towards the pupillary margin and anastomose with each other to form the minor arterial circle. Here in this diagram, we are seeing these are the 2 long posterior ciliary arteries. This is the anterior ciliary artery, and they are anastomosing and forming a major circle, arterial circle, and then giving branches supplying to the ciliary body and the choroid. There is a major arterial circle, and this is a minor arterial circle. Minor arterial circle is at the pupillary margin, and major is at the base of the pupil. And the major arterial circle branches on only these branches, they run radially on the iris, and just they form a circular circle, which is called a minor circle. So we have 2 arterial circle from 3 main blood vessels, the 2 branches of long posterior ciliary artery and anterior ciliary artery. These are the muscular branches only from inferior rectus, superior rectus, lateral and medial rectus. Now the venous drainage, the venae vorticose, they are mainly called the vortex vein or posterior ciliary veins. These blue, they are denoted by blue color, the vortex vein. These are 4 in number. They are superior temporal, inferior temporal, superior nasal, and inferior nasal. They pierce the sclera obliquely on each side of superior rectus and inferior rectus. And it lies about 6 millimeters behind the equator. This is what you're saying is the posterior structure of the eyeball. This is the medial rectus muscle, this is superior rectus, lateral rectus, inferior rectus. This is the optic nerve and its sheath. These are the 4 varicose veins, superiorly to nasally and laterally, inferiorly to nasally and laterally. The 2 superior vortex veins, they open into the superior ophthalmic vein, and the 2 inferior vortex veins, they drain into the inferior ophthalmic vein. See, these are the 4 vena vertigosa, that is the vortex veins. They drain 2 superiorly, they drain into superior ophthalmic vein, and inferior one, they drain into the inferior ophthalmic vein. Some clinically applied aspects. The inflammation of uveal tissue is called uveitis. As we have seen in the previous lectures, that inflammation of conjunctiva is called conjunctivitis. The inflammation of uvea is called uveitis. And it is based, classification is it varies according to the anatomy, position, the part of involvement. It is divided into anterior uveitis, posterior uveitis, and intermediate uveitis. So the anterior uveitis, it is the inflammation of uveal tissue from iris up to pars plicator of ciliary body. It has divided, means it is can be called iritis when inflammation is predominantly it affects only iris. When it affects the iris and pars plicator, the part of ciliary body, then it is called iridocyclitis. Anterior cyclitis when pars plicator of ciliary body is predominantly affected, then it is called anterior cyclitis. So there are iritis, iridocyclitis, and anterior cyclitis. Now the intermediate uveitis, it is the inflammation of pars plana and peripheral part of retina underlying the choroid. The posterior uveitis, it is the inflammation of choroid and retina, and hence the term the choroiditis or chorioretinitis or retinochoroiditis or neurouveitis. They are used synonymously to posterior uveitis. And there is a term called panuveitis, which means the inflammation of whole of the uvea, the iris, the ciliary body, the choroid, and the posterior retina. This is a diagrammatic representation. The anterior uveitis, it involves the anterior part, the iris or anterior part of ciliary body. The intermediate uveitis, the ciliary body is affected. And the posterior uveitis, the posterior part, side this red box, the choroid and retina, this is affected. When all 3 structures are involved, then it is called panuveitis. And these are the 3 main features where the patient of uveitis comes to the OPD. The main symptoms are pain, redness, and photophobia. These are few complications of uveitis. As we see, there are formation of the posterior synecdoche. These are the attachments of the iris, the pupillary margins. They get adhered to the anterior lens capsule, and when we try to dilate the pupil, it becomes a shape of festoon shaped pupil, irregularly dilated because of the attachments here. This attachment, it is due to the inflammation, the exudates which adhere to the surfaces of the posterior surface of iris and the anterior surface of the lens. These are called the posterior synecdoche. The second complication is cataract. Cataract is basically due to the severe inflammation, long-standing inflammation in the eye, which can lead to formation of the cataract. or the long-term use of steroids, which is the main treatment for uveitis, that is the cause of cataract. There can be formation of peripheral anterior synecdoche. This is a gonioscopic picture of the angle of the anterior chamber. These are the attachment of the iris root. They are called peripheral anterior synecdoche. They are blocking the layer, they are blocking the angle of the anterior chamber, causing blockage in the aqueous drainage. It is decreased and it causes increase in the IOP, hence the term glaucoma. And there is band-shaped keratopathy. On the cornea, there can be a band-shaped keratopathy, which is a common complication of uveitis. There are few clinical signs that we can see. There are aqueous cells and aqueous layers that we can see there. The circumciliary congestion is an important sign. Circumcorneal or some circumciliary congestion is present. It can be a sectoral congestion. The sectoral part can be affected, but most commonly it is the circumciliary congestion. There are presence of aqueous cells and flare. The aqueous cells are the presence of inflammatory cells in the anterior chamber, and the inflammatory response causes the white blood cells, just neutrophil, monocyte, lymphocytes, to leave the iris vessel and they reach the aqueous humor. This is a Blake slit lamp picture of the anterior chamber. We can see these are white deposits present. It can be seen as aqueous cell. The aqueous flare, it is the turbidity of aqueous humor which is caused by increased in the protein level. The blood aqueous barrier has broken down, which results in the protein or albumin exudation in the anterior chamber, giving it the normally clear or colorless aqueous humor, a milky appearance, which is called as flare. See, the anterior chamber is not very clear. It is a milky appearance. This is due to the increased turbidity, leakage of the proteins in the anterior chamber. Basically, the treatment of uveitis that it depends is mainly the steroids, the anti-inflammatory should be given to reduce the inflammation, and we have to evaluate the person completely and thoroughly to know the cause of the uveitis or the affected any other body part which can be affected. Uveitis is very common in a patient of tuberculosis or sclerosis and sarcoidosis and rheumatoid arthritis or ankylosing spondylitis. So we have to evaluate the patient systematically, and all the systems should be reviewed and blood tests should be done, and then the proper treatment can be given to him. The main emphasis on the treatment of uveitis is on steroids. So this is all about the uvea, choroid and ciliary body. Thank you for listening.